other satellite. So we're not going to be speaking much about orbits or anything. This is more going to be about transponders and frequencies. So basically the idea is that when a satellite's mission is over, it's replaced when it's out of fuel, or it's replaced with a new satellite. And usually they're not identical. In the perfect world, you'd have the same satellite again, but of course technology changes. The business plan may be different. You would probably decide, this is not where we want to go in the future. We're not doing this mission anymore, but we're reinforcing this other mission. So you're going to change it with a satellite that's hopefully going to be able to take over your customers, but maybe not all, and maybe not exactly in the same way.
I'm sorry,
yes.
Is the satellite's designed for a specific frequency, or does it matter?
They're designed for a specific frequency, but the challenge is your new satellite is maybe not designed for exactly the same frequency as the previous one. Mm-hmm. So we'll see where they differ. We'll take a concrete example where we had some similarities and some differences, and then you're going to have to see how you're going to tell your customers, okay, in your case it's very easy. You can just move on to the next satellite, exactly the same frequencies. And then you're going to have to tell the other customer, okay, new satellite's coming, the old one is leaving, so that staying on the old satellite is not an option. But we don't have exactly the same frequencies, we don't have the same polarization, you're going to have to change some things. And that's going to be the whole challenge of anticipating that and see how you're going to do it. So the idea is basically you have satellite 1 servicing a region, you have a gateway, and before it moves on to a new mission that can be deorbiting or just moving on to do something else, it's replaced by another, usually a new satellite, but not necessarily. So it's all about taking care of this, and then of course you'll have times that are defined by when can this one arrive and when does this one have to leave. And maybe other things, but those are the basic times that start. So during your transition, you're going to want the satellites to be very close. So usually there's a process that we call co-location, where you keep the two satellites in the same orbital slot, where they have similar parameters so that from the Earth, they have very small angular separation, so with a single satellite dish, you can operate both, more or less transparently. So it's how you're going to do that. Sometimes you can co-locate them for a long time, sometimes you can't. Typically, in this case, where the old satellite is going to move out, you're going to do what we call a temporary co-location. And that's going to be valid for 2, 3, 4 months. That's going to be decided at the beginning. But then you're also limited in time by this factor, because you've defined your orbit so this works for a certain amount of time. If suddenly you say, hey, I need an extra month or an extra month, there's going to be fuel involved, fuel cost, to maintain the satellites in the box for a longer period. So that's another element that you may want to take into account. And then as I was saying earlier, you're going to have different cases. The case where you can just do one-to-one swap over from the old satellite to the new satellite, we call that a hot switch. Basically what happens is you have your two satellites that are together in your orbital slot. If you have transponders that are equivalent one-to-one on each of the satellites, you're going to switch on the transponder on the new satellite, the old one's being on with the service. And so you're going to have both on for a while, so there'll be some form of interference between the two, but you're going to see a signal on the transponders on both of the satellites. As soon as you see the signal come up on the new satellite, you can switch off the one on the old one, and basically in a few seconds your customer is transitioned from the old to the new satellite. So that's the perfect case where everything is simple. You just do a one-to-one. It's very easy if you have one customer on your full transponder and you're switching into an identical transponder on the other satellite. It's relatively simple if you have more than one customer but your transponders are identical, but then you need to discuss with each one of the customers separately and make sure that their power levels are good. As soon as you have more changes than that, things get much more complicated. So this was the kind of ideal situation where you just hot switch. That takes anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes. In other cases, you really need to anticipate and coordinate. So you can maybe you have a change in frequencies, maybe you have a change in polarization, and that may involve changing the hardware, going, if you have a lot of remote sites, going to your remote sites, changing your hardware. If you're changing your pole, sometimes you may need to turn your feed on your antenna. They're not dual for both feeds. So all that are things that you may have to take care of, and you're going to have to tell the customer in advance and see when they can do it, tell them when you plan to do it, and make sure that they're going to be available to do that. Yes?
What does it mean, turning the feeds?
So the feeds on your antenna, they're set to get a signal in a certain direction. And if your polarization is in the opposite side, sometimes they accept both, and sometimes you actually have to make a manual change or a software change to have them both accepted. What you'll do, or you can do in some cases, is make sure that you have the service that's available on both satellites. So you're going to uplink your signal to both the old and the new satellite at the same time during, let's say, you agreed with the customer to do this for 3 weeks. And then that gives the customer, he still has everything, all his antennas working with the old satellite, and he has time to visit each site and upgrade them so that they are locked onto the new frequency. That's what we call a dual illumination, because we're illuminating on both satellites. Of course, you need to be able to uplink to both satellites, so you need both of your gateways to be accessible during that time. And it has to be feasible in a reasonable amount of time. Sometimes it can be done more or less automatically. The customer has a server and they can just sort of push things to groups of antennas one at a time, and sometimes they actually have to physically go to the sites. And during the last transition, we had a customer who said, yeah, we have this one site on an oil platform, we visit it twice a year. Okay. When is that planned? And we had planned his transition in like March timeframe. He says, oh, I only go, because there was this 1 week in April. And luckily it was like 3 weeks later and it was still in our time frame. So it worked out well. But if they tell you that and it's 6 months off, then you're starting to negotiation, like, is this platform going to stay without service for a certain time? Can you actually push them to go a bit earlier? Then it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. Depending on how big a customer it is, how much they pay, how critical the service is. But sometimes you're really stuck with situations like that where they can't go. And we had the same thing where we were changing things in Australia, when they have a large number of antennas in Australia. Visiting each single site in hugely remote places in Australia can also take. We had a customer in Nepal, and they said, yeah, what? These are kind of mountaintop sites, and it was literally mountaintop sites. Like, okay. So then it's really a matter of discussing with them and trying to arrange, but you really need to plan this ahead of time to see what's feasible, what's not. And even when it's feasible, there's things that happen in the meantime, but you need to anticipate that a little bit. So, an example, we moved, so our old satellite was NSS 6, that was at 95 degrees east, and it was being replaced with SES 12 that was launched in June 2018. It had a 6 months orbit raising, so the transition was planned around the February to April timeframe. So during the time when we were going to do this transition, we were going to keep them co-located in, so it's an imaginary box in space where you keep the two satellites and maintain them so that they're seen as a single from Earth. And during that time, the idea is to keep the angular separation smaller than 0.1 degrees between the two satellites. And basically what the flight dynamics team told us is we could do this for 4 months. Any additional time would be a penalty in fuel. So the idea is that finish this before it happens. It's not a huge impact. I mean, an additional week is a small fuel impact. An additional 3 months is a month or two, a lifetime, which can or not, depending on the satellites. I mean, some satellites we have a 30-year lifetime. We don't worry about 1 month. When you're close to the design lifetime, you don't want to start playing around with that. So, just to explain, but this is the old satellite. These you could probably not tell, but the yellow is a Middle East beam, so a beam that goes over Middle East, probably until India, something like that. There's a beam over India, a beam over China. I don't think we have any landing rights in China, so this probably wasn't used at all. A beam over Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, and Australia. And we'll just call them, there's band A, band B, and band C. So these are different bands of frequencies, and each is split into 5 transponders. And above the line is one polarization, below the line is the opposite polarization. So, and there were customers more or less, except for the Chinese beam and the Indian beam in band C, there was nothing, but there were customers practically everywhere. There was some that were cross-tracked, so that we went from Middle East, they were uplinking from Australia, downlinking in Middle East, or opposite way around, uplinking from Middle East, going down to Australia. So there were services that were going from one to the other, but mostly it was just interbeam services. So that's what the old satellite looked like. Bring the new one, of course it's not identical. Whole band B has disappeared because SES decided that on the new satellite they were going to go modern and use what we call now spot beams. So the high throughput spot beams that cover very small zones with a very high throughput, which is basically the new technology for everything that's data transfer. But that's using all of the band where we had the services on NSS6. So basically before you can switch any of these spot beams, you have to have all of these guys off of NSS6. So that's already, you see that, you already know that's going to be a constraint. The band B is the same, except we have 4 transponders instead of 5. So mostly the frequencies are going to be the same. The way you're going to be inside the transponder may not be identical, but you can see, hopefully there's not going to be too much impact on the B-band customers. Here there's some additional transponders. You'll probably have new services there. So you probably don't need to worry about these. These are all Indian beams. The landing rights in India are a nightmare, so we won't focus on that too much. And then this is band C, where the frequency, the polarizations are a bit different than what we had on NSS6. But we still have the same, more or less the same frequency. So whatever was in band C can probably stay in band C. So you can already see from the start, the satellites, it's meant to replace. There's some things that are common, some things that are different. So if you look at this, these are what we call the spot beams. So you have little beams over individual regions. It's very much used for aero services, data services. So basically things that are very new that were probably not on NSS6 before. It's a different technology. I mean, airplanes that are flying through the spot beams have to have the equipment to change frequency every time they're in a different beam. So it's not something that was available to the customers who were using full satellite. It's going to be fine to sell new stuff, but not, unless you have a customer who was operating in just one of these beams, and we did actually have that case where we had a customer who just had a few antennas. They had one in Oman and one in Bangkok, and we were able to cross-track 2 beams to actually keep the interaction between their 2 sites. But that was the only customer that we actually transitioned from the wide beams to one of these spot beams. And then these are the differences. We'll look at, I think we have a little bit more detail on the next slide, between the beams, between the two satellites. So I think the blue are the new one, and the red lines are the old satellites. So okay, there's this beam here, but we didn't have any customers there, so we were losing that. That wasn't an issue. But you can see that all this part here, where we had some power, we have much less power on the new satellite. So any customers in there are not going to be happy.
Just a question.
Sure.
I'm not sure if I understood it properly what's a spot beam. I'm quickly having a look on the wiki at the same time, but it's just a signal, in fact.
It's like a multi-beam.
So exactly, instead of having, usually your satellite just pushes down over a broad region, and here instead of doing that, it has many tiny regions with a higher intensity. So very basically, the throughput is much higher, but the beam is much smaller.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, since they overlap, you have to have a frequency change when you move from one to the other.
Okay.
So it gives a huge flexibility, it gives you a very high throughput, but you need to be able to manage that.
Okay, so it's not the single frequency.
Exactly.
No,
And for DTH, for video, it's useless.
Yeah.
For anything that's data, it works fine. For video to household, it's not meant for that.
Yeah.
And aren't there more LEO constellations that use that kind of idea? Or-
Yes.
Okay, because it's not usually GEO that does it. Are they?
No, this is very new. Well, new now is a couple of years, but these are the first satellites that actually do that in GEO. No, because the whole point of GEO was that you were fixed above a point,
Yes,
so you were staying above this point. There was no point in having, because the LEO, what they also have is steerable beams, so that you're pointing, but your beam has to stay pointed, and it has to be captured by the next satellite coming over. So here you don't have that. The beams are still fixed; they're not moving, or they're not targeting anything.
And this one doesn't affect the power of the beam?
Sorry.
The long distance between the Earth and the satellite doesn't affect the power of the beam?
You mean the GEO?
Yes.
Well, they're amplified more. They're meant, and that's why they're small. So that you can still have a lot of throughput. And the idea is that you can spread when you have. Here it's mostly over land. If you have a plane that's moving over, you're going to put high power here, then here, then here, then here, and you're not going to eliminate the power over all of the area in one go. That's why they're called high throughput beams.
So you have the power is better split because you get plenty of antennas directly.
Exactly.
And they are narrower, and you get the better gain from the antennas.
Exactly.
And this is the solution in this case.
And again, looking at the footprints, we have the difference between, so this is the new satellites in red, the old in blue. All this area around Oman, we're going to lose power. Here we have another challenge. There's mostly the coverage is similar, but instead of having one Australian beam and one Southeast Asian beam, they split them in three, doing Australia, Southeast Asia, which is basically Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, and Indochina. Well, they call it the Indochina beam.
Sorry,
Yes.
in previous slide,
Yes.
there was some area that, as I understood, you said that you lost the beam.
Here.
Yeah.
So this is, we have this on the old satellite, but it doesn't, if you see the new satellite, there's nothing over Africa, but we didn't have any customers there, so it was, this was not wrong.
Because of customers.
If you have a customer there, then you have to repoint it to another satellite. So actually, this here, even though we weren't losing coverage, it was actually a challenge because we had customers who had services over both Papua New Guinea and Australia, and suddenly they had to use two different beams. So if they had just a little capacity, instead of needing one transponder, suddenly they needed two, or it wasn't worth it, and or we had a case where they were doing, I think it was Australia, Southeast Asia. We didn't have enough combinations possible to do all of the possible uplink from one down into the other, so we had to give up some of them. So I mean, these are the constraints you have. I mean, the satellite, the design was made 5 or 6 or 3 to 5 years ago. It's too late. That's how it is. If the business guys decided that was how, now it's in the sky, it's ready to go. All you can do is tell the customer, this is what we have. If we can't find a solution on this new satellite, we'll look on another satellite. But yeah, you have to adjust. So these are the constraints.
As a conclusion from this, for this satellite, are you going in the future to send other satellites, or that just covered by the transponders of the other satellites, such issues?
Sorry?
If in this case, because you just told us about these problems with the channels of
Yes.
the satellites. So you are planning in the future just to send other satellites in the place of you are just resign of the maintenance with this case. I mean, so.
Yeah, I mean, you would think they would continue with the same service, but sometimes you don't know why. I mean, whether the people change or there was. Sometimes you have the information. It was a decision, a conscious decision, saying no, we don't think we have enough business here, and we knew we would have to let customers go, but that was a conscious decision. Sometimes, like in every company, people leave, people go, and it's like, why was it done like this? It's like, I don't know. So sometimes you know when there was a conscious decision. Sometimes did they miss something, or maybe there was no business when it was designed and things came up. There's so many possible configurations on the satellite that the photo you take when you're designing the new satellite, the evolution is not always 100% like you plan it to be.
And is it possible to program the satellite to be appropriate for new missions?
It depends. So the satellites that are built today are very standard. They're built for a mission. You can tweak some little things. So some transponders you can configure them and say you want to do Middle East, or you can change them to do Middle East, Australia. There are different possibilities. It's not 100% flexible, so certainly can change, but not all. They're in the process of designing those new satellites that are much more flexible. So it will come, but it's still under development. But the idea is to have much more flexible satellites, to even have flexible footprints, so that if your business is going down in one place, you can actually reorient it to something completely new. But yeah, right now it's still in development phase. That's what they would like to do. That's what's in discussion. But then of course, when you decide to buy a new satellite, there's always budget involved. You go for the cheaper option, which is the classic one, or So it's one of the options for the replacement of our satellites, but we don't know yet whether they're going to choose that option. So we'll see in the coming months how things develop.
So there should be some financial analyzer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, finance is always a big factor when they decide to buy a new satellite. Exactly. So whether can you actually, is there enough value added to making a very complex satellite compared to just getting the same one as you bought before, or slightly different, but a classic design. So looking at this, what we saw, we had identified three groups of customers. We had the Middle East customers, which seemed to be able to transition very easily. Even those who weren't in Band B, there was still enough capacity that we could pre-transition them from Band A to Band B and then hot switch them to the new satellite. So we thought the Middle East customers would be super easy. In the end, they were the hardest one to transition, but in our plan, this was the easy group. So we hardly looked at them. It was so easy that we just thought, okay, this is how it's going to happen. It was written, and we concentrated on everything else. Super project management. the big mistake you made. The second group was the Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia customers in Band B that could mostly hot switch as well. There weren't too many of them. They were easy to target, so those were relatively easy. And then the third group was the Asia Pacific, that were mostly in A band that we would have to move over. By that time, we already had limitations in B band because everything was full. We would have to move them over to C band, which were new frequencies. So that was going to be a big change. So we had these three groups, and so the idea is, okay, now we know more or less we have these three groups of customers. We're going to have to transition them. There are also constraints where you can only transition one once another has been transitioned. So these are little things that will come up later, but it's not, these are kind of details that will come up when you look at the details of the transition. Overall, you have your three groups and you're going to see how they're going to move. In terms of contracts, we have to tell our customers, so mostly when you have a contract with a customer, if you're running close to the end of life of your satellite, it's going to have a line saying, you will transition to another satellite, you will get formal notification so many days ahead of time. So the standard contract said we had to notify 4 months ahead of time to tell them what frequency they would transition to, and 1 month before with all the details, the date, the frequencies, and all the individual details of the technical change. So these were milestones in our transition plan. So that's the first exercise, set up a timeline, seeding. So try to identify what you're going to have to think of and what you're going to have overall. I mean, not very detailed, I'm not asking which transponder goes where, just overall, how do you see things going? What do you need to prepare before your transition? Try to look and think of, so this is very different from the previous exercise, so it's going to be different. So try to think, we can either do it here or if you prefer to do it on paper, I don't know what you prefer. Or if we're not too many of us, we can do it on the board here. So if we start chronologically, we had the launch of SES-12. This was 4th of June 2018. Okay, so there's about 1 month of launch, 6 months of electric orbit raising, another 1 month of testing, in-orbit testing. We relocated, and then the satellite is yours. So you have, remember how we said the co-location could last about, did we say 4 months? So this is the time that you have for the transition. From purely, let's say, technical constraints only. So do you see anything else in this? You don't need to write it, there's a slide with everything afterwards, so you'll figure it out. Otherwise, we can take it in a photo. I can take a picture and add it to the presentation if anything new comes up on there.
Okay.
Can you think of anything else that needs to be on there?
It's for the initialization.
The what?
It's for the initialization.
I suppose there is an issue with the transponders, so testing with the providers of the services in this period.
Well, there's not much you're going to be able to test before.
Because then you get in the position.
Exactly. So during this time, the technical teams are actually going to test that the transponders work.
Yes.
But it's at a different orbital position. So your customer doesn't really have a chance to test it when it's at a different orbital position.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose that the time after the time of the transition, there will be this period of time for the.
So and that actually happens during the transition. So the idea is that you prepare everything so that there's not much testing necessary. It's just going to happen and it should work well. Of course, you can adjust power levels. It's something you're going to have to do in real time, but there's not so much the possibility to experiment. So you have to have, in the period before you start here, there's going to have to be a period where you have there's a section called sales engineering. The guys are actually looking at the technical aspects of the sale. So any service that's on a transponder, if you move it onto a different transponder, how do the levels adjust? Can you use the same bandwidth? Can you use the same amplifiers? Do you need more power? So all this, and running all the link, this is called running the link budgets. So this will have to be done before this. But it's a theoretical job.
Yeah, but this is the theoretical calculation that you get this real measurement on the time when you are testing.
Well, you get it during the transition.
Yeah.
You actually get it at the time of the transition. You're going to switch on and check. So yeah, you're going to have to run your link budgets here. For all of your customers knowing where they move, what transponder they're moving to. And yes, this is going to be done, have to be done before the transition. And there's also the notifications. So minus 1 month, you have the handbooks. So those are the complete books where you actually send all the details for each carrier, what they're uploading, what parameters they're uploading with, what modems they're using, and this is full details of the carriers. And the minus 4 months, these are going to be the notification letters. So that's just a letter telling the customers, hey, we're going to bring in the new satellites. Your service is planned to go onto this frequency. Please confirm reception, and with the confirmation, it means they're accepting. They don't usually there's a discussion, right? It's not just sent to them without having anyone discuss. But the sales people are going to check whether it works for them. If there's no change, it should be relatively easy. But if there's a change, this is when they have to identify. Oh, watch out! This frequency our equipment doesn't do. Is there an alternative? We can do that, but we need new equipment. We want you to finance that since you're changing the satellite. And then that's a sales discussion, right? That's not part of the project management, but sales discussions can be long. So you need to do this ahead of time so that it doesn't impact the start of your transition. Because you can start here, but if because of any other discussions you can only start here, you're just going to have less time to do it. Because the end of the co-location, I mean, you probably have a little bit of margin, but you can't count on it too much. There are also other things that are going to come up.
Some failure on the satellite.
Anything. I'll show you what. Okay, so that's basically. So, say you're initiating today. You have your initial transition plan, your notification letters. It's a good thing to plan your vacation. Well, not necessarily your vacation, but if this is around Christmas, everyone disappears for 2 weeks, right? So there's no point in planning thousands of activities. There's no one going to be in the office at that time. So it's good to highlight it and to know. And if you're working with other countries, take into account. With the Middle East, there's the Ramadan is not so bad, but the end of the Ramadan is a big party, and it's a fact. They're going to be off, and just like you're off at Christmas, and usually you're not as much aware of it, and some of you guys aren't answering anymore. And it's like, oh, sorry, we were away. It's like, yeah, that's right. And it's like, you're thinking, why? But when you have a worldwide company, it's good to have these things notified. Now SES is starting to put them on the internet to watch out next month and next week, and when it's a one-day closure, no one cares. I mean, it's a bank holiday in Singapore tomorrow. Okay, great, no big deal. But if people, if the entire company is going to have a week off, it's good to know. Yeah, exactly. So as soon as you initiate, you start to do the link budgets. Identify who's going to need your illumination. Get from the customers how long you need it for. Do you think you can do this in 1 week? Do you think you can do this in 3 weeks? There's some people say, oh, maybe we could have 6 months. But you're not going to have 6 months. What's the next best offer? So there's some form of negotiation. As a project manager, you're not in direct contact with the customer. So you're discussing with the sales managers, and sometimes it works very well. Sometimes they say everything's fine, and you realize they never talk to the end customer. But sometimes their customer is not the end customer, so you really have to make sure that they go all the way down to the very bottom of the link.
If they lose, it's your responsibility, or
It's technically your responsibility. I mean, and it's not always the end of the world. I mean, but sometimes you have to, you think something was really well planned, and you discover the day before that the people at the ground station have no idea that they're transitioning the satellite. So, and it was a very, in one case it was a very easy transition. So it was just a matter of, finding the phone number and saying, hey, by the way, can you be available tomorrow? And they said, well, it's the middle of the night. I said, yeah, we're doing it on purpose in the middle of the night so that, if there's an issue, it doesn't affect the customers. So they just had to staff the ground station at that time to make it possible. But yes, it's just a matter of being ready to deal with surprises. And sometimes it slows things down. I mean, there was one case where we had given the Nepalese an extra 3 weeks or something to visit all of their sites. And then they asked for an extra, like, come on, and luckily we still had some time, so it was okay. But we were starting to put pressure because we didn't know how much more times they were going to ask for more time. And then they suddenly took out the terrorist attack risk. So I was like, but this is a system that prevents terrorist attacks to our country. And then you're thinking, okay, I mean, we can't exactly stop a system that's preventing terrorist attacks. Is that really serious or not? And then you have to try and dig and find out, is this just a way of getting away with it? Or so, I mean, you have crazy stories, but that's what makes it fun, right? So basically, this is how it's going to look. This was planned, initially, it was planned, we had 4 months until end of May. And then just about when everything had been planned and everything was more or less on paper, SCS signed a big contract for all of the spot beams starting on 1st of May. And of course, to switch on the spot beams, you need to have completed most of your transition. So suddenly we lost a whole month. So we thought we had 4 months, and we only had 3. So again, you redo everything, you start renegotiating with customers. Okay, we gave you 3 weeks, we can only give you 2 weeks. But yeah, that's what it's about, and it's, if you've discussed it, you know where your buffers are and what customers are actually asked for a comfortable 3 weeks, but they don't really need it, and some they really need because they really have lots of remote sites to visit. You can try and play around with that. So if you had to set up a transition plan and identify the risks, how would you move forward from there? So I think we've identified the first steps where you run the link budgets. I mean, you're not going to be responsible for running the link budgets. You're going to be responsible for chasing the guys who don't do it. And getting the buy-in from their managers for them to spend time, because of course, the guys in sales, the thing is they're usually told priority is selling. And there you're telling them to spend time on a contract that's existing, that's there, and there's not going to be much value added. It's just that something that has to be done on top of what they're already doing. So you have to convince them that you actually need them to spend time to look at this, because if their customer is not happy on the new satellite and their link budgets haven't been run correctly, they may not renew. But this is a long-term investment, and in sales, you don't always have the luxury of long-term investments. You're fighting for your short-term.
So I should probably know this. But what do you mean when you say you're not responsible for the link budgets?
It means you're not computing them.
Okay, and so that's what you're doing in that time.
You're asking. There are teams that are running them. So you're not actually running all the link budgets. You have dedicated teams with the different regions or however, or customer, depending how it's distributed. But you're not actually running the link budgets for each of the customers. You can help them if you have that competence.
So, yeah, but they just go to a program and they calculate it?
Yes.
Okay. And then how long does that typically take?
It can take, depending on how easy it is. If you have a very straightforward transition, some of them were, I mean, they just had to run, check that it was the same thing on the new satellite and done. In some cases where the new satellite has less power, it took a lot of time to actually check itself. Because my understanding, I'm not a link budget specialist, but what I understand is you have so many parameters, there's so many ways of doing it, and you just want to find the best way for the customer. Whether you change the mod code, how they're transforming their signal, or whether you give them more bandwidth. And of course, you don't want to give more bandwidth unless you have to, because their contract price isn't going to change. So you will only do that if you don't have the choice. But if it's the price to pay for them to have the right quality, then you'll have to do that. So it's just a matter of playing around with the parameters and knowing the customer, knowing what they can do, what they can't do. And very often the customers have their own link budget tool. And my understanding is that every link budget tool gives a different result. So this is not pure science, it's just depending on how you modelize atmosphere and things like that, and whether you do it in clear weather option or whether you take into account the worst case scenarios with storms. You're going to have different situations. So, and the customer, when they have their own link budget tools, when they actually bother doing it, they want to make sure they have the same result as you. And then it's a matter of aligning two things with different tools. And that I found can take a long time. So just an overall transition plan. The first thing you're obviously going to do is get a full list of all of your customers. You have your satellite and you just usually have, whether it's SAP or whatever tool you're using to identify your customers. Just print out all the customers you have on your satellite. Identify which ones go beyond the start of your satellite, because this you probably do sometime before you're going to start. So if your customer ends here, you're going to check, is it going to be renewed or not? And if not, just ignore it. But if your contract already goes past the new satellite start date, you're going to have to go into the contract and check, was the new satellite mentioned? If it was mentioned, did we promise anything? And sometimes you notice that they did promise some things, even though they didn't have the parameters of the new satellite. So you have to actually take that into account and make sure we don't give them less than what's promised. Whether it's in terms of bandwidth or whatever. So sometimes you end up with surprises in the contract saying, okay, because the contracts were made for 5 years and we didn't have the details, but we knew there would be a replacement satellite. And so they just have something in there. Like, okay. Then you have to check, once you have your preliminary plan, you have to check what we can do on the new satellite for this customer. So that's going to involve, actually, in this case, it was our responsibility to identify which customer was going where. So when we were communicating that with the sales people, and then they would come back if there was a problem. But then, if we were changing our frequency, we would have to inform the sales manager, say, okay, can this customer work with the new frequency? Do they have their equipment work? Does it work in terms of regulatory? And in one case, it was identified after a super long time, because all the maritime stuff in Australia, we had moved over to the C-band, and no one said anything until like 2 weeks before. Said, oh, we're not allowed to operate C-band and maritime in Australia. Like, okay. And by that time, there was no alternative. So then we had to find a solution on another satellite. So then, for maritime, it's not a big deal because they're already pointing their antennas, so it's not a major issue. But actually, identifying all of these things can take a long time because you're going to have so many different cases. And then once you've identified who can go where, you're going to actually put it in a certain order, saying, okay, we can do this one, and then we can do this one. You try with the easy ones first. just because it's nice to have some out of the way to say, okay, this is done, we can close this on to the next one. But for some cases, you won't have a choice. So you don't need to go into all the details of this, but just to show you how complex this can get. We had some steps that were actually moving some customers from one transponder to another on the old satellite, so that it would be easier once we brought in the new one. We thought that would be super easy, but we're just going to say, whenever you're ready, you have 6 months, tell us when you're ready, you can just switch over to another frequency, take your time, you can have 6 months of dual illumination and just move your equipment. Turns out in the 6 months, they didn't find time to do it. And then you're stuck, because you thought that was going to be a super easy transition, and the guys are still on the old satellite in an unplanned frequency, and it's like, okay. So you have to change everything. It worked out in the end, but it was... So, and then all the easy ones are all the hot switches. So you see all the ones you can just switch, or you have a frequency change, but you don't have any constraints. When they move is not important. They don't depend on something else being switched off or something else being switched on. So you can start those as early as possible. And just say, okay, let's just start it as soon as the satellite's there. We switch on the new satellite. Take your time, you have maximum 3 months, but go for it as soon as you can and tell us when you're done. So we had some of these, like the Australia to the Middle East, Australia to Australia. Some of these were started at the very beginning, and just they were set up, not necessarily done except the hot switches over 1 day, but they were ready to go. And then we had the complex cases, where we had a northeast beam where we had one customer who had transponders sort of spread out on the satellite, and for each of these changes, he wanted 3 weeks of dual illumination. But because we were moving things, we were moving some transponders with overlap, so we couldn't switch off certain ones before the other ones on, certain before the others were switched off. So we had steps that had to be completed before we had to do the next one, which kind of brought us to like these 9 weeks, and it was really, it was really a critical path from one end to the next. In the end, these were the most complex, but because we were so focused on them, because they were on the critical path, those worked really well, because we were putting the pressure on them continuously. And then you tend to forget the easy ones. That's kind of, yeah. Yeah, the risks, I'll let you think about them. So you've seen a bit of how it works. Just think of, where do you see the risks in this? I mean, I've told you some of them, but try imagining where would you have to focus, including the easy ones, just
Risk in the transition plan?
in the entire thing. I mean, imagine you're here at the beginning, where you've identified your satellite is in the AOR, and you're at this step. You're planning ahead, and you're trying to think, okay, where do I see risks? What do I have to emphasize on? And, is there anything I need to do to make sure it doesn't happen, or be ready to do it in a different way if it does happen?
I think that in this case, the 2 parameters may update the whole situation. The first, for the technical part, and the second is the communication with the people. Because you have some customers, and they have, as you said, their own customers, and there's a lot of interaction, and there are a lot of contracts, and
Yes.
investments, some of them may be cancelled, and you should predict any situation. And I think that one of them is the interaction between the it's a
Yeah, the different levels of customer. I see what you mean. No, that's a good one. And what was your first one?
And the technical, for example, the link budget, some calculations, and the differences between calculations and the simulations.
Absolutely, yes.
And
Those are going to be the 2 of the major ones. And how do you see, what you do about them?
to solve them?
To solve them, to mitigate them, or to how do you see?
From the beginning of the project, you still plan some redundancy of the satellite, and it's per channels, per antennas, per equipment to just solve in case that's happened, you know.
You can have spare equipment, you don't really usually have that much.
From the beginning, it's all of the times they calculated that they use maximum of 100% of the equipment. From the beginning.
No, you mean additional bandwidth. If you need to, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You can try to keep in some cases
There is
when you
also
have the possibility
just to change the frequencies
exactly.
and mix them.
Yes, that's one thing you can do. And in one case, we had a customer over the Middle East area where the power was lower, where all the link budgets we run said he should be able to do it with the new satellite, and he was seeing a loss of tower. And we were convinced because some of the sites were going well and some were not going well. So we said it's probably just a misalignment of your antennas on some of the sites. But they said, we don't have time to visit our sites. We can't just go around Oman and just change everything over the day. And the last thing you want during a transition is to have to bring them back to the old satellite. Because you've brought them onto the new one, technically the old one is still there for a few months. But if you have to you can do it for one night if you have a very specific problem, you know how to solve it, and you know you can go again the next day or the next week. But if you're into this long-term thing, bringing them back to the old satellite is just going to kill your next mission and your whole project. So you really have to do everything you can to keep, once you've transitioned them to the new satellite, is really to keep them on the new satellite. And so what we did is we gave them additional bandwidth, saying, okay, this is free of charge for 3 months until you visited all your sites. If once you visited your sites, realigned all of your antennas, you still have a problem, then we can rediscuss. But we want to make sure you visited all your sites, and we give you 3 months. But it was a long negotiation to actually get that done. Because they were just saying, it worked well on the old satellite, so we just want free bandwidth indefinitely. And then you have shown them, yes, but you have other sites in this same area that are working well, so there's no reason for you to just get additional bandwidth. So then it becomes a sales discussion that you're not controlling, but you're still responsible to get the project done. So it can be a long process of getting all that done.
I think that the contracts that are the most important, but you have contracts with manufacturer, you have contracts with launcher, you have contracts with customers, and all of them should be modulated in a way that if one section doesn't work, your responsibility and your loss will be limited or decreased.
It's not. You're not, physically responsible for anything. But if the service isn't there and they paid for a service somewhere, companies are not going to ask you to pay. But if they need additional bandwidth, you'll feel that your project is not going right. So it's your responsibility to make sure that the salespeople are following up, and that they're not just, that they end up closing this problem and the problem just doesn't stay open with an unhappy customer. So it's just a matter of keeping this active. So let's see what else we have. Yeah, the other thing we didn't identify, which is kind of obvious, is just a delay, because the launch, as we said, is always delayed. Of course, with a 6 months EOR, you still have time to plan. So you don't depend so much on the launch delay as when you have just a 1 month between your launch and you're actually starting your transition. Here, the transition was the launch was 6 months ahead of time, so that gave us plenty of time to warn the customers, watch out. Initially, the transition was planned in October, it actually took place in February. But of course, in June we knew it wasn't going to be in October. So we knew we still had the 6 months of EOR, so it was easy to contact the customers and say, okay, watch out, we've had this much delay, it's going to come 6 months later. So that was one. The ground station readiness was another one that we identified, and luckily this one we identified very early, because basically since we had one satellite replacing another, we just had one ground station in Australia for that satellite. And the people had just assumed that it's going to be replaced by another satellite, but the first satellite that was leaving still needed to have a ground station. So the people who were doing satellite 1 thought they were keeping the ground station, the people who were doing satellite 2 thought they were going to use the same ground station. So sometimes we say, wait a minute, we're talking 2 different positions here, so we're going to need 2 antennas. Luckily, we had another antenna that was being built for the telecommanding because they need one for each satellite. So we had one, but it didn't have all the payload modules. So luckily, this was identified really early, so we were able to say, hey, we need to have the payload modules on our second gateway. Please order that, and it was there in time. But when you identify it, like, what do you mean we don't have an antenna for SES? So the lack of resources is what I was discussing typically for the computation of link budgets for getting the information from customers. There's nothing that the sales team hate more than telling customers that there's going to be a change. So you actually have to get them to say, we need you to inform the customer, and that's one of the main reasons why we have the notification in the handbooks. We have to have them signed by the customers. We don't just send them, we have to have them signed and sent back to us. Because it's our way of making sure that the information got all the way through. When it comes back signed, we know the customer received it. It's not perfect because it doesn't necessarily go. If the customer has his own customer, we're responsible for the contracts that are with SES. If SES's customer has a contract with someone else, there's not much we can do about that. We can ask them to inform. In some cases, there's a very good relationship, so we can actually go directly to the end customer. But it's not our obligation. We don't have a contract with the end customer. So that's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. But it's important to ask, is the end customer aware of this? If you're not dealing directly with the end customer. The customer transition delay was one we discussed. If something can happen, it will happen. Anything. As I said, you need to concentrate on the ones that are on the critical path. That doesn't mean you should forget the others, and that's something we typically tend to do. We tend to think that because they're easy, we can handle them at the last minute. But they're not always as easy as they seem. Just because they're technically straightforward doesn't mean that the sales interaction part is going to be straightforward. Another thing we noticed, and that was something that you can really anticipate, and in some cases we did it, and strangely in some we didn't. It's funny because it's the same problem, we should have identified it everywhere, is the cross-polarization. So if your customer is sending a signal that's not perfectly well polarized, so if he's sending it in vertical, and instead of being perfectly vertical, it has a slight angle. If you have a transponder on in the opposite polarization, it's going to have some interference from that signal. If the transponder in the opposite pole is not on your old satellite, you're not going to notice that. But as soon as you switch it on a new satellite, you're going to see the interference. And it's something that's very easy to identify. You can measure it before the new satellite arrives. So it's something that should be tested for, should be verified. In some cases, we discovered it. Luckily, we discovered it in the case where it was very easy to correct. And then we checked it for all the other transponders, but it's not something we had identified in all the cases. So again, it's these little things that you should be able to anticipate, but if you don't think about it, it's good to have it in. And that's typically something, if you miss it this time, that's fine. Put it in the lessons learned for your next transition, because transitions are all the same. You're going to have that come up in the next one. So that's a typical example of, this is something that you're going to have to capture at the end of your project, and put it in, if you have a transition checklist or whatever you may have, put that in there so that next time you think about checking, and put this in your risk matrix next time.
And as a manager, you earn this by experience, or again, written somewhere in YouTube?
Well, typically it's mostly experience, and then if you're lucky, the person who did it before you left you some guidelines. So there was a checklist when I took over the job. The previous person I put in a checklist, but you put this checklist of what you experienced. And another thing is, often you make a checklist of what went wrong in your case, but you forget to add in your checklist what went well. And so you need something to have gone wrong many times, but each point have gone wrong before it actually makes it to the checklist.
That's why you use in the previous section that it's important to wrap up and
Exactly. The wrapping up, it can be very short. It can just be, what I usually do is, if I have a folder for my project, I make it a README document that I start with AA, so it starts, AA README, so that it comes up. If I sort them alphabetically, it comes up at the top. And you just, even if they're typos, just write it in there. And then when you have time, you can sort it and make it pretty if you want to, but at least it's in there if anyone takes over. And you have the little things no one thinks about, and who to contact in this case, and how do you remember to do this and remember to do that. Don't forget. It's part of the handing over or the lessons learned. Some people love to do lessons learned, and some people never do them. There's never any between. Sometimes, I've had one manager who was the king of lessons learned. He spent his life doing lessons learned meetings, and it drove us crazy because sometimes it's just not necessary. So you have to find the right balance of finding what you have to do and capturing what's important. I think that's the word. The lower power zones, the ones we discussed, and I mentioned having additional bandwidth. And these are the couple of examples I had for the customers that made us have delays. We had a customer in Nepal that needed to reach, high, difficultly reachable zones. And it's already long to get to one, but he had 50 or 60 of them that he needed to reach. One had this thing with an oil platform that he was only visiting on a specific date. We had the regulatory issues, and the pre-transitions that were going to take place within 6 months and then never took place. So these are all little things that actually happened. We didn't have a formal risk matrix. We had identified where our problems were, and none of these were in there. So these are typically the things that will make it to our checklist next time. To think out of the box, things, and identify. And most of these were not a big problem. Except this one, because this one we didn't have a solution. So there we actually had to find solutions on another satellite and transition these customers, and it was still feasible. But if we hadn't found a solution on another satellite, we would have lost those customers. All the others, they just took more time, and since they weren't on the critical path, we managed to get that done within the transition period. But we hadn't thought of it. Luckily, we had buffers, so that was all feasible. Okay, so you saw that these were satellite involved teams in Singapore that were dealing in Australia and Singapore, which were dealing with the Asia Pacific region. We had teams in the Middle East for the Middle East teams, and then we had teams in the US for. We had a whole series of contracts with government services. Typically, the American Army had services in Korea. So we had teams that are basically all over the world. And so the next question is, how do you communicate in this kind of project? What's the best way? You need to reach all these people, finding you can't travel to see them all every week. What's the best way? Do you split them in groups? Do you... So you have to find something. What do you think would work, and then test it. And see if it's the best way. You have to make sure you have people with a common goal together. So how do you see things? How do you...
Skype?
No, Skype isn't Skype or whatever, teleconferencing. But you put them all together on a call, or...
No. Divide by groups, maybe. And then communicate. Maybe some of them communicate maybe first with each group, then you can contact some groups. But you need, I think, always to control from time to time, to talk with everyone, to see how they are doing together.
Yeah, basically that's what we did. So we have the usual project team management. So we basically split into the Middle East, APAC, and government services. And initially this was mostly because of time zones. Just because it was impossible
that's I wanted to say also.
to have everyone on a call. Otherwise, there were some who were staying up late, others who were getting up really early, and no one was happy. So we split this in 3 zones, and we had big calls with each of the groups. 6 months ahead of time, we did this every 2 weeks, and as we got closer, we did it every week. So one big group call, and then pestering people one by one for each customer. So that keeping the individual communication. Some of them it was super straightforward. They were on the call, they gave you the information, you got everything you needed, you did everything by email. But some because it was more work and you actually needed more interaction, and some because you have to follow them. And so it's really on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, it depends on the people, because some like just
Exactly.
pure report, and some you need to talk a little bit.
Some people, they don't, even if it doesn't work for them. The only way is to give them a call, talk to them. And even just getting a report by email. I was like, oh, you can talk to me, you can send me this Excel by email. So yeah, several months before we did monthly and then bi-weekly updates. And then we did a review with each customer. Identify the status and make sure you identify, and when you're communicating in these big calls, make sure you get the important information on a minimum of slides, because first of all, the updating of the screens isn't always super fast, so if they can miss something, when you're in front of a screen, you're never as involved as when you're in a room. So you need to have the information there as clearly as possible, and get people on the same track together. Exactly. This is where we're going. These are the impacts if it goes wrong, and really get them involved. And then as you get closer, just make it more often and start showing where you have red lights, where you are. This.
It's bi-weekly, every 2 weeks,
Yeah,
or
it's
twice
every
a
2
week.
weeks.
Okay.
Or I use it for every 2 weeks. I don't know. Some people in SES use fortnightly for every 2 weeks. I just hate that word. So
It's less pretty, but it's less ambiguous.
It's totally ambiguous, yes. I've seen it used for both. I can put for every 2 weeks. As long as you get the idea, it just gets
More frequent.
Exactly. It just gets more often as it gets closer. And yeah, for the problematic customers, every day if necessary. It's the only way to get things going. And sometimes because every day you get an epsilon of information, and to get the whole thing, they give it to you piece by piece. And they need to meet someone else, and the next day they need to meet someone else, and then before you actually find, and if you wait for a week, very often I find some people only take the time to think about your problem when they're on the phone with you. So if you wait for a week, nothing will have happened. So, and you need to identify those people. Some people just work like that. They're actually into your thing, and they're happy to talk with you every day. It's not that they don't want to do the work, it's just the way they work. There are more and more people actually who work like that in a very interactive. So you need to tell them, okay, we're working every day for 15 minutes a call, and we'll just go and while you're actually on the call, they're thinking, okay, then we need to do that, and they'll actually do it, and then you get the update the next day. But it can be time consuming as a project manager to figure that out for, especially when you have such a huge team, because here, for this transition, we were talking around 40 customers. So you're following, even if you take out the easy ones, you're still talking quite a few interactions. So just to show you an example of how we were showing things. So basically, I had a full presentation. Yes, go ahead.
For an update, for updating a customer with a report, for example, is this report generic for every customer, or is it specific for each customer?
You mean the handbooks we were sending to the customer?
Yeah, but also for just the updating of what is happening right now.
So the documentation that we were sending to the customer was customer specific. Okay. So there were 2 pages of general information on the new satellite that was identical for everyone. Otherwise, it was 100% customer specific, with really, up to the detail of every carrier frequency and what modems they were using for each frequency and how that was going to be mapped onto the new satellite. So that was very completely personalized. For the meetings we had with the sales team, there we had the details for all the customers of that group. And then I tried to keep on the screen at the whole time and let them scroll through their presentation on their laptop, but have the status as a background so that they could see this at all times and see exactly what had been done, what hadn't been done. And so you see that we had a plan. Some of the letters had been sent, some hadn't been signed. The handbooks, we were working on preliminary versions. For some, we already had the final. Had they been sent? Had they not been sent? Did we have the link budgets ready? And where we were, did we have confirmation of the schedule or no confirmation? Are we okay to go? Not okay to go? And try to find a way to get the most important information in a concise manner. You still need to send them information with all the details because they need to have some reference. Because with this, they just kind of know what the problem is and what's not a problem. But they need to have all the details, so you probably need to have, whether it's a PowerPoint or Word document, whatever works best for you.
This kind of document, let's say, it's made in Excel, or you use some other software? PowerPoint, okay.
For all the, yes, for
special
the full documentation was Excel because we had all the parameters of all the customers. So in that case, I find Excel is pretty handy. There's maybe better. Whatever works for you. I think what's important is find a tool that works for you. Okay. What's easy for you to handle
is the customer that is telling you how to provide information in what format? Like I want only PDFs, or other people say just write it directly in the email?
The handbook, it was our format. Some of them wanted a paper copy. We would send it by email in PDFs just to be sure that it could be modified. And asked for it to be, or at least for the last page to be returned signed. But some wanted it sent by real mail. But mostly, actually, the handbook is more an official document that they can actually go to management with. What has a specific format that has to be agreed between the two parties, between SCS and the customer, is what we call the lineups. It's really the technical information of how the signal is going to be transmitted on the new satellite compared to the old one. And those are programmed. The documents are actually read by software. So there the format is very strict. And But that's always an agreement. I think we have there's standards between SES and the customers. I think the typical the hardware that works always works with the same formats. But that's an agreement. It is something. We'll look at this when we do the co-location example, because we were co-locating satellites with a different operator, and we had to exchange information and agree on the format. It can be something that takes the most time when you're actually setting up an interaction. Simple things like agreeing on what time standard you're going to use can be. You think everyone works in UTC? No, not everyone works in UTC. So agreeing on format can be, but once it's set up, it makes things very easy. Once everyone agreed. So that's one example. Yep, that's something we would put in the slides, and to make sure that to keep the pressure up. It's like, okay, if you accept a delay, we're not going to be able to switch on the spot beams at the beginning of our contract. If we have a delay, we're going to delay the end of the transition. Our satellite, number one, cannot move and do a bring into use to book a frequency for us at this orbital position. So explaining, telling the salespeople why we're putting pressure on the customers. Like it's not just for the fun of it. It's not just so that I can say I finished my project 1st of June. It's because there's a real impact behind it. And getting that information out, I think it makes them feel responsible. It's not just, you're being picky and you're just being a pain. You just want to scream louder than their other manager. You're saying there's a business reason behind it. And I find that explaining that gets the people much more involved. Every time you've told them, look, technically we can do it. Technically, co-location-wise, we discussed they can give us an extra week. But business-wise, if we do this, we're losing a huge opportunity. It makes them think differently, and they understand why they're doing it, and they have a much easier job going to the customer and explaining what the situation is. And telling the customer, yes, it is for the customer, but if it was you, we would do the same thing for you. We would fight for the satellite to arrive in time for your service to be done. And getting everyone to respect the other teams that are working and that also have their deadlines really brings everyone together in the project, and I've found that helps a lot to get them to buy in and to accept and really show, explain in bits, and even if it's very technical. Because sometimes when it's very technical, people say, I just don't understand it. Just say, okay, bring it down to this. We can't do this, we can't do this. And bring it down to something that they understand. Because of course, if you say, well, if we do this, it's going to cost 2 grams a kilo on the satellites, and they're looking at you like, yeah, so what? Says, yes, but that has an impact on the satellite lifetime, and your customer has signed until 2023. If we lose the satellite in mid-2022 because of this, it's like, okay. Bring it back to what speaks to that. The schedule was the main output. It's your visibility to the world as a project manager. So when you finally have you've come, this is what came out here. When you're actually starting your transition, you actually have your plan. You're ready to go with actually the times of day when you're going to move which customer from which transponder on the first satellite to which transponder on the second, or you actually tell them what the activity is. You switch this on, you switch this one off. It looked like this. It looks relatively simple. The first version was unreadable, and it takes time, and it's super important when you communicate that to make it something. It's your visibility to the world. So even the management is going to get that. So it has to be something that they can understand. It's simple enough, but it still has to get all the information. Because when you're talking to your stakeholders, everyone says, I want to see this in the plan, and I want to see. So the payload team wanted to see the switch off and switch on of all the transponders, which is essential information. The salespeople wanted to know exactly what time the transition was, because that's what they wanted. Even if the customer had the information, they wanted to have this in line and check that it was in line with what was in the handbooks, which obviously made sense as well. So you have to compact this and find the right way, and you take 2 days if you need to take 2 days, but make sure that your communication is super clear and easy to read. And ready to print, because some people still work with paper. They're just going, and if your Excel just sort of shows, prints over 15 pages that they need to scotch around, you've lost your thing. Make sure before you send it out that whatever is set up, it is going to come out nicely on whatever page they print. And it's kind of silly. It's when they tell you that, you think, come on, it's what's inside that's important, not the way it looks. But actually, the people are going to judge you on the way it looks first. Then they're going to think, and once it looks good, then they're going to look at it. But if it doesn't look good, they're not even going to take the time to look into it. So it can be kind of a pain, because making Excel look good is kind of a nightmare.
And just give my experience with that in ISRO, sometimes in the meeting is cancelled when a prime presentation doesn't look good. So the entire meeting with 15 people will be cancelled because the presentation doesn't look good.
No, but it's true. And if it's better for the person to cancel it and to redo it than to have 16 people looking at it like, what does he want? So, but yeah, so yeah, it's kind of sad, but it's super important. Yeah, so it takes time and getting. I'm not talking the colors and everything. But at least making the information very clear.
But also onboarding the people on the topic to be sure that.
Absolutely. This is just on the look and feel, but onboarding it and getting them to understand the outline of the project and getting them all into a common goal. And that's what I was saying for the AMC-9, the orbit. It was, kind of a ridiculous project because there was not much to win except a little bit of glory, but now everyone's forgotten about it anyway. But having everyone in there wanting to do the same thing and knowing why they were doing it, it got the whole project. These guys worked day and night for 6 months, and they really were regretting it when it ended. So yeah, presenting. When I showed the split into 3 groups, we actually had, with each of these 3 groups separately, a presentation that was common to all of them, where we outlined what was going on, and we presented the whole thing, saying, okay, with you we're going to talk about this part specifically, but we had something that was very general and that explained the whole thing to everyone first. And getting them all on the same line, getting them used to your vocabulary, because sometimes the typical thing that drives everyone crazy is the frequency nomenclature. Because there are different frequency zones that each have their own names, that each have their own regulations. But what's BSS in zone 2 is not what's BSS in zone 3. So when you're in zone 2, we're talking about a satellite that's in zone 3 or a customer that's in zone 1. What's BSS? So just make it clear from the start. This is what I'm going to use. And if someone says, oh no, that's too confusing, discuss with him. Find something that works for both of you. It's silly, but if everyone's with T-Procos and doesn't know what you're talking about, you're not getting anywhere. So it's important, either you write it down, if you need to have a page of these are the acronyms I'm going to use, at least they know they can go back to it. Some of the contracts have 15 pages of acronyms. I think that's a bit too much. I think the satellite manufacturing, these always have lists and lists and lists and lists. But okay, that's a totally different story.
My question is, do you find it bad that they use so many acronyms or that they explain them all?
No, it's not bad because it's there because it's a reason. Every little group has their acronym because they use it every day, so they just come up. It's not that And it's a necessary evil. I mean, it's kind of unavoidable. It just means that if you're coming from the outside world, it's a nightmare to get into it. But you can't ask people who say SCV every day to suddenly start saying the pagecraft vacuum test, because that's what they use every day. It's the way it is.
I think the most dangerous part is when you have acronyms that can mean different things.
Yeah, and you have that because you only have so many letters, and you try not to have them with 15. So.
Yeah.
But as long as you're clear in this section, this means this. But it can be confusing. It's a pain. It's a pain when you're new to something. Once you're in it, you get used to it.
Talking about acronyms, what does SES stand for?
It used to be Société Européenne des Satellites. But now it's just SES, so it stands for nothing anymore. Because since it became international, they decided it didn't stand for Société Européenne des Satellites anymore. So it's just SES. So, but yeah, initially that's what it was for. I was going to say something else.
Does SES have a culture of converting everything into acronyms? Because in some companies, everything is converted.
Yeah, in the technical department, they have kind of a tendency to do too many of them. And I think the worst I found is I was in the flight dynamics department before, and you have east thrusters on the satellite and west thrusters on the satellite, and for some reason we managed to do east-west thrusters with the east-west maneuvers with the west thrusters and west-east maneuvers with the east thrusters, so no one understood what was going on. And of course the convention was different elsewhere. So, and that you were thinking, do we really need to call them like this? And especially east-west, it wasn't going from east to west, it was just using the west thruster. So why was it called east-west? It was just, it had probably been picked up from somewhere the way they worked in the beginning, but it just made it a nightmare for anyone who arrived in the section. And then of course after 2 years they were used to it and they were using it as well. And all the coding was done like that. So once it's in there, it's really hard to get things out. But yeah, that's you have to get used to them, you have to accept them, and as long as they're documented, it's okay, but it can make reading a document painful. It's like reading the legal stuff in the beginning of a contract. Yes, the other thing with the documentation that you have to share, so typically things like the schedule that you have to share with the management, you don't want to send them something every 2 days. On the other hand, sometimes you need to update it every 2 days, and you can't send them version 1 and then version 17, because no one accepts being kept out of it. So having intermediate versions, so whether you call them 1A, 1B, 1C, or 1.1, 1.2, whatever, just make sure that you have one group who gets the major versions and your subgroups who gets the intermediate ones. Find a way that works, or have two completely different groups. If you want to have a simplified schedule for management and a detailed schedule for your team, whatever works. There's no right way of doing it, wrong way of doing it, but you just have to find the right dose. If you're sending the receipt for the relocation, there's the timeline that I showed you where you have all the steps. In some cases, the relocation is very straightforward and it's updated just once or twice, but sometimes it's updated really every 3 or 4 hours. And everyone gets it. There are like 150 people who get this email and it's yes. And the people just go crazy because then you get this 5 pages of Excel that come up and no one wants to see that. So it's a matter of finding the right balance. It takes some test and intuition. But yeah, try to identify the right groups and get the right information and keep it coherent within each group. Especially the management, if you send them version 1 and then version 13. Someone's going to come up and like, what happened? Why didn't we get the other 12 versions? And if something happened in between, they're going to say, oh, if you had told us and sent it to us. So just make sure you keep things logical in your subgroups. Oh, I want to went faster. So, Closure is about feedback, lessons learned, and handover, and identifying what didn't go right, but also, as we said earlier, identify what went well. Because if you don't capture it, it'll be a what went wrong for the next person who does the product, the similar project, because they won't see it in your risk list, so they may not think about it. And it's important to put that in your lessons learned. If you have a document with, this is what went right, this is what went wrong, we should have thought about this. It doesn't have to be long. I mean, you don't want your lessons learned or your handover document to be 15. Well, maybe it's okay, it has to be, but for a project like this, it's probably just going to be one page of your main points or one PowerPoint slides of, what went right, another one what went wrong, what we should do better next time. But basically, capture all the main points, including what went well. I think that's important to do. Yes? Do you have any questions on the previous, this one? We didn't make it very interactive. I'll try to make the next one more interactive so you can actually dig into it a bit more.
I personally have no idea about our presentation.
The one you're going to do with for the project? I think the best is to discuss that with Philippe, because he's going to do the project in a much more formal, do the easy, and ask him if he wants something that's, that follows the EASA nomenclature or anything like that. We can discuss. I'll be there at least the last 2 days. We'll both be there, so we can discuss that if you have any specific questions of how you want to present that. But I think presentation. I think he'll want a presentation. I'd say for the pitch, you probably want something about more or less like this. How your document will be, I don't know, he'll probably want a bit more details in the document. But I think the best is to discuss that with Philippe when he comes. It's the 4th to the 8th. So I think it's Monday afternoon and then all the mornings. So if any of you are interested in internships at SCS, HR contacted me, so I'll try to bring it next time, a presentation about the internships and how to apply for them.
Yeah.